Imagine this. You're lying next to your partner, the one you vowed to share your life with, but there's a wall between you, a silence that hangs in the air like an unspoken truth. The intimacy that once bound you together has withered away. There's no touch, no connection, just the hollow echo of what used to be. And as the days stretch into weeks, and the weeks into months, you begin to ask yourself, what happened to us? In this void, the question looms, can a relationship truly survive without intimacy? Or are you merely existing, two souls tethered together by duty, not desire? As we embark on this exploration, let's turn to the words of the great philosopher Albert Schweitzer. The purpose of human life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. But what happens when the connection that is meant to make life meaningful, the intimate bond, begins to slip through your fingers like sand? Intimacy, in all its forms, is more than just the physical act. It's a bridge that allows us to communicate with each other on a deeper level, a bridge that supports not just our bodies, but our very souls. And yet, for some, this bridge is abandoned, and in its place, an insurmountable distance begins to form. But if intimacy is so integral to the human experience, what happens when it fades away? Can we truly fill the space left behind with anything meaningful? Are we left to live in the shadow of a relationship that is no longer what it once was? The concept of a sexless relationship has long been a taboo topic, often dismissed as something insignificant, or, worse yet, something to be ashamed of. The truth, however, is much more painful. A sexless relationship is not merely the absence of sex. It is the absence of connection, of closeness, of the one thing that can bring us closer to another human being, in ways words simply cannot. As philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "Marry, and you will regret it. Don't marry, you will also regret it. Marry or don't marry, you will regret both." But the regret that Kierkegaard speaks of isn't merely about the choice to marry. It is the underlying dissatisfaction, the yearning for something more that so often arises when intimacy is lost. In a relationship where sex has faded away, the partners may still love each other, but that love is no longer supported by the same closeness and physical affection. They become strangers sharing a space, rather than companions sharing a life. And therein lies the hidden pain. When intimacy fades, the relationship itself often transforms into something unrecognizable. The conversations become more surface level, the gestures less affectionate. What once felt like a partnership of two people, united by their desires, has now become a partnership based on mutual obligation. There is no guiltier feeling than knowing your partner's needs are unmet, and even worse, feeling as though you are unable to fulfill them. The emotional and physical withdrawal can create a deep sense of loneliness, even in the presence of someone you once cherished. To understand this deeper, let's turn to the words of the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. In the context of a sexless relationship, this quote resonates deeply. You may want intimacy, want connection, want love, but you can no longer desire the very thing that once filled your heart with passion. The pain comes not from lack of wanting, but from the loss of something once so vital to your existence. Sexless relationships often carry with them a silent form of suffering. It's not just a matter of unmet physical needs, it's the emotional toll that the absence of closeness takes on a person's spirit. When we feel disconnected from our partner, it can trigger feelings of rejection, doubt, and deep emotional distress. The betrayal isn't always one of infidelity, but of unmet expectations, the desire for closeness that remains unfulfilled. This is the painful truth we often avoid confronting. Intimacy is not just a luxury in a relationship. It is the foundation that keeps the bond alive, that allows love to thrive and grow. Once the bridge of intimacy begins to crumble, a unique, and often unspoken pain emerges. It is not simply about physical neglect. It's the deeper emotional void that becomes harder to ignore with each passing day. The sense of connection that intimacy once fostered begins to erode, leaving behind the husk of a relationship that feels more like an arrangement than a partnership. As the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." But is it possible that hell, in a sexless relationship, is the absence of connection? The emotional distance between two people who were once intimately bonded can feel like a void that grows increasingly suffocating, making the relationship feel more like a prison than a source of joy. This emotional distance is often misunderstood. It's easy to assume that the partner who is not desiring intimacy is the one at fault, but it's rarely that simple. Often, both partners are silently suffering in different ways. One may feel rejected and inadequate, while the other feels lost and distant. Both are navigating the painful reality of unmet emotional and physical needs. There's a quiet desperation in the absence of intimacy. It is not loud or obvious, but it is pervasive, affecting everything from daily interactions to long-term satisfaction. The spark that once ignited passion now seems to exist only in memories, leaving the individuals in the relationship grappling with feelings of loneliness and longing. As we delve deeper into the pain of sexless relationships, we must consider the existential struggle for meaning in human life. The renowned philosopher Viktor Frankl once wrote in his work, Man's Search for Meaning, that the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. In the context of a sexless relationship, we may feel powerless in the face of this emotional and physical absence, but Frankl's words remind us that we have the ability to choose our response. We are not defined solely by the loss of intimacy, but by how we navigate that loss. The question becomes not whether the relationship can be saved through physical connection, but whether both partners can find new ways to reframe their bond. Can they rediscover closeness in ways that transcend physical intimacy? Or will the absence of intimacy drive them to the brink of emotional collapse? This is where the true challenge lies. How do we cope when the connection we once shared is no longer there? And how do we rebuild something that may have been broken beyond recognition? When intimacy wanes, many individuals are left grappling with feelings of rejection and inadequacy. One partner may retreat inwardly, avoiding confrontation, and the other may seek solace in outside validation, looking for intimacy elsewhere. This is where the pain of a sexless relationship becomes more than just an emotional burden. It becomes a mirror, reflecting all of the insecurities and unmet needs that have been buried beneath the surface. As philosopher Simone de Beauvoir noted, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. In this sense, intimacy is not something that is simply given. It is something we continuously build and reshape within the context of our relationships. When this process is stifled, when the effort to grow closer is abandoned, the emotional toll becomes harder to ignore. For many, the absence of sex becomes a profound symbol of deeper emotional disconnection. It represents a breakdown in communication, a failure to nurture the bond that once existed. The act of intimacy, then, is not just a physical one. It is a manifestation of the emotional and psychological investment that both partners have in each other. Without it, we are left adrift, questioning the very foundation of the relationship. When one partner feels emotionally and physically starved, the temptation to seek intimacy outside of the relationship can become overwhelming. But here lies a critical question. Does the absence of sex justify betrayal? Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once warned, "He who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he thereby become a monster." In other words, when we are driven by unmet desires or unfulfilled emotional needs, there is a danger that the very actions we take to fill those gaps may lead us down a path of destruction. Seeking intimacy outside the relationship may feel like a solution in the short term, but it often leads to greater pain, betrayal, and loss. The real question becomes, can intimacy be revived within the relationship, or does the search for fulfillment outside the bond destroy it forever? As we consider the weight of living in a sexless relationship, we must also ask, can intimacy be revived? It's one of the most challenging questions a couple can face. Rebuilding intimacy requires more than simply rekindling physical connection. It demands a renewed commitment to understanding each other, a mutual willingness to explore what is missing, and the courage to confront the deeper issues at play. In The Art of Loving, Erich Fromm argued that love is not merely a feeling, but an art that requires practice, commitment, and responsibility. In a sense, intimacy must be cultivated like a garden. It must be tended to, watered, and nurtured regularly for it to grow. When intimacy fades, it's not just about the absence of sex, it's about the absence of the deeper, ongoing care and communication that sustains a relationship. But how can we cultivate intimacy when it feels like we've already tried everything? In his work, The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck wrote, "Love is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth." This idea of love as an extension of self requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is a crucial element in rekindling intimacy. In a sexless relationship, partners may need to shed their protective barriers and allow themselves to be vulnerable with each other again. However, vulnerability is not something we naturally seek. It can be terrifying. But as the philosopher Rainer Maria Rilke suggested, perhaps all the dragons of our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us once beautiful and brave. In the face of the painful void of a sexless relationship, vulnerability may hold the key to renewal. The act of opening up, of confronting the pain of what's been lost, is a courageous choice. For many, it may feel like the most difficult step. But if both partners are willing to be vulnerable, to face the emotional scars and fears together, intimacy can begin to heal and grow once again. As intimacy slips away, fear often enters the picture. There's the fear of abandonment, of being emotionally left behind. There's the fear of not being enough for the other person, and ultimately, the fear that love is slipping away. The terrifying reality of living in a sexless relationship is that it can make us feel invisible, unworthy of affection, and even unlovable. Yet, in these moments, it's crucial to remember the wisdom of philosopher Albert Camus, who stated, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." Despite the harshness of emotional distance, there exists within every person the potential for healing and growth. There is always the possibility to rebuild, to transform the relationship by learning from the pain and using it as a foundation for something deeper and more meaningful. The most powerful tool in overcoming the pain of a sexless relationship is communication. When intimacy fades, silence often takes its place, and that silence can be deafening. It's in these moments of quiet despair that the need for open and honest dialogue becomes paramount. As the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once noted, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. In the silence of a sexless relationship, both partners may feel like they are not being their true selves. They may suppress their desires, emotions, and needs for the sake of preserving peace, but this only leads to greater disconnection. The truth, however painful, must be spoken. Each person needs to be heard, not just for their desires and needs, but also for their pain and their fears. True intimacy can only exist when both partners are willing to communicate openly, to risk vulnerability, and to rebuild their connection from a place of honesty. This isn't about blaming or accusing. It's about understanding each other's experiences and being willing to work through the discomfort that comes with change. So, what is the ultimate lesson in all of this? The hidden pain of sexless relationships is not just about the absence of intimacy, it is about the loss of connection, the withdrawal of emotional engagement, and the silence that often fills the void. However, this pain also holds the potential for transformation. In acknowledging the hurt, in confronting the silence, And in opening ourselves to vulnerability, we can heal the wounds that a sexless relationship leaves behind. As we move forward, we must remember the words of philosopher Martin Buber, who believed that the essence of love is in the I-thou relationship. It is about seeing the other as a complete, unique person, worthy of attention, respect, and affection. In a sexless relationship, the key to rebuilding intimacy is to return to that fundamental recognition of the other, to reconnect on a deeper level, and to find ways to reignite the flame of love, not just through physical acts, but through emotional honesty, vulnerability, and care. Yes, intimacy can be lost, but it can also be found again, even in the darkest corners of a relationship. The key is not to abandon hope, but to acknowledge the pain, confront the fears, and take the steps necessary to rediscover the love that is still waiting beneath the surface.